All right, so we're diving deep today into a Real Madrid match. One that really caught my eye. Real Madrid versus Leganes ended 3-2. And a win's a win, but something about this one just seemed a little, well, controversial, shall we say.
Yeah, I gotta say, I see where you're coming from there. The sources you sent over paint a pretty fascinating picture. It's all the match details and then some articles really digging into the game. And yeah, controversial is definitely a word that comes to mind, especially when it comes to how some of those refereeing decisions went down.
Doesn't hold back, does he? He goes straight in calling it very, very controversial and pointing to specific plays that really shaped the whole match.
It's pretty striking how he just comes out and says it right away.
Yeah.
But then when you look at the details, especially that penalty awarded to Real Madrid in the 32nd minute for the foul on Arda Güler, well, let's just say the skepticism from your sources is pretty much immediate.
Yeah, I mean, a penalty in the 32nd minute, that's got to set the tone for the rest of the match.
Yeah.
So how did the sources break down that decision when they had a chance to really look back at it?
Pretty clear cut after seeing the replays. He says straight up, I don't think it's a penalty, sincerely. They talk about a minimum rub, but not nearly enough to justify a penalty in their view. And the fact that VAR didn't step in, well, that adds another layer, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The explanation given is that they tend to not intervene on plays that are, up for debate.
So we're seeing a pattern here, VAR staying out of it, even when there's clear debate happening. So it wasn't just that penalty call and thought, hang on a minute, did any of the other sources have a different take on whether it was the right call?
Well, not in terms of it being, a stone cold penalty.
Yeah.
Zeroed in on the replay, too. They highlighted that there was contact on the hip, but then they raised the big question, was that contact really enough to warrant a penalty? And then you got the Texto Pagado article, which I think sums it up nicely by calling it a soft penalty. Penaltita, they say, for Arda Güler going down. So yeah, overall, it seems like most folks saw it as a pretty questionable call.
Questionable for sure. But debatable or not, the score is now 1-0 Real Madrid after Mbappe does what Mbappe does and puts it away from the spot. But it sounds like Leganes weren't about to just roll over and accept that.
Absolutely not. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because despite that early setback, actually has a lot of praise for Leganes. They call their performance a very good match and highlight how competitive they were against a much stronger team, especially considering they were battling relegation. They even single out players like Rosier and the central defense with Sergio for their solid contributions.
Cool. And that fight really showed in their response on the scoreboard, right? They didn't just equalize, they took the lead. Makes you wonder if maybe Real Madrid got a little bit too comfortable, a little too early.
How quickly Leganes turned things around. They equalized in the 34th minute with a goal from Diego Garcia.
Right.
And then just like that, 7 minutes later in the 41st minute, they go ahead thanks to a goal from Raba. The commentator even goes so far as to suggest that Real Madrid sort of fell asleep and let that momentum swing completely in Leganes' favor.
Wow, so in the space of a few minutes, they go from thinking they've gotten an advantage to suddenly being behind. Real Madrid were missing some key players, weren't they? Did the sources make a connection between those absences and how the game was playing out?
Oh, definitely. The fact that Vinicius and Rodrigo weren't in the starting lineup from the get-go, and Valverde was coming back from international duty and not in his usual midfield spot, that was definitely a talking point. How crucial Valverde is to Real Madrid's midfield, his energy, his control, and how playing them at right back in this match probably contributed to their struggles.
It's always fascinating to see how those tactical decisions forced by circumstance can really impact the flow of a game. So beyond the missing players, were there any other standout performances that caught the attention of your sources?
To individual performances. He wasn't too impressed with what he saw from Modric or Camavinga, actually. He described Camavinga as quite erratic and even said he looked overwhelmed at times in midfield. And while Arda Güler won that controversial penalty, he also apparently missed a few chances later on, which caught their eye.
So a real mixed bag there for some of the Real Madrid players. And it's halftime now with Leganes in the lead 2-1. But as we know, that wouldn't be the end of the story, would it? The second half had some twists and turns of its own.
Oh, for sure. Real Madrid came out strong after the break, and Bellingham managed to tie things up pretty early on in the 47th minute, bringing the score to 2-2. But the real drama, while that came with the third and ultimately decisive goal for Real Madrid, it came from Mbappe in the 76th minute, and I think it's safe to say it caused quite a stir.
So tell me what happened. What did your sources have to say about that winning goal and the controversy surrounding it?
That there was no foul by Tapia on Rodrigo in the build-up to that goal. They're very clear in saying that Tapia won the ball cleanly, and, well, you guessed it, VAR decided not to get involved. Yet again.
It's almost like VAR decided to take the night off for this particular match. What was the consensus from the other sources?
Yeah, the Texto Pagado article is in agreement. They say Tapia's challenge was quite clean. So again, a potential foul that could have gone Leganes' way was not given, and it leads directly to Real Madrid's winning goal.
We've talked about some questionable calls that went Real Madrid's way, but let's talk about their star player, Mbappe. He really shines throughout all these sources, doesn't he?
Absolutely. I mean, two crucial goals.
Yeah.
The first from that controversial penalty, and then a beautifully taken free kick. He's consistently singled out as the difference maker for Real Madrid. He even goes as far as to say he was surely the best of Real Madrid on the day.
Really leans into that idea that it was his individual brilliance that saved the day for Real Madrid. They even drew a pretty big comparison, didn't they?
Yeah, they compared him to Cristiano Ronaldo, no less. They talk about his knack for scoring those crucial goals, especially when the team is struggling, and how he can almost single-handedly win games. And what's really interesting is that they highlight the fact that Mbappe's added free kicks to his repertoire now, too. So it really reinforces this sense that his individual talent was the deciding factor in this really tough match.
And we're actually lucky enough to get some of Mbappe's own reflections on the game, right? His post-match interview with Real Madrid TV was included in the sources.
Yeah, and he's very open about how tricky it can be for teams to get back into the swing of things after an international break. But he emphasizes that the team was totally focused on getting the win no matter what. He also mentions that he's been putting in extra work on his free kicks with the coaching staff, and you can really hear the emotion in his voice when he talks about equaling Cristiano Ronaldo's goal tally in his first year at the club. It clearly means a lot to him.
That competitive spirit really comes through, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That they felt the refereeing was a major problem in this match, and it went beyond just those penalty calls we've already discussed.
Yeah, the commentator's pretty scathing in his assessment of referee González Fuertes' performance throughout the game. And he even says this while acknowledging that he generally believes referees are honest and trying their best.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the penalties. They also felt strongly about that potential foul leading to the winning goal and just overall weren't happy with the officiating.
Touches on the refereeing too, but sort of flips the script and highlights a sense of injustice from Leganes' point of view.
Exactly. They make the pointed observation that the refereeing will not be complained about by Madrid, which I think speaks for itself. But then they go on to describe an incident where Leganes had a very strong penalty shout for a foul on Diego Garcia. And guess what? It was the same referee who had given that soft penalty to Guller earlier in the match. So from their perspective, it really adds to the feeling that some big calls didn't go their way.
It really does feel like the scales were tipped in Real Madrid's favor, even if they weren't exactly dominant on the pitch. It's really telling observation. He points out that Real Madrid ended up asking for the time at home against a team fighting to avoid relegation. That says a lot about how uncomfortable they were, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that single detail really sums up just how much pressure Leganes were able to put on them, even at the Bernabeu. They clearly believed they could get something from the game, and they pushed Real Madrid right to the very end.
So let's zoom out a bit and look at the wider implications of this result, especially in terms of the Liga title race. Did your sources draw any conclusions about how this win, or maybe how they won, impacts Real Madrid's chances compared to their rivals?
While they got the 3 points, Real Madrid's performance wasn't exactly what you'd expect from a team that's running away with the title. In fact, they even hint that, based on recent form, Barcelona might actually be the team with the momentum in the title race right now. So for Real Madrid, this win was huge in terms of keeping pace with Barcelona, but it definitely wasn't pretty.
And even some of the Real Madrid fans seemed to pick up on that, weren't they?
Quite a few Real Madrid fans actually left the stadium early while their team was still under pressure in those last few minutes. Not exactly the usual scene after a home win, and probably reflects how underwhelming the performance was and maybe some frustration with how the match played out.
So what we're seeing here is a match that on paper looks like a straightforward Real Madrid win. But digging into the sources reveals a far more complex and controversial story. Leganes truly rose to the challenge and exposed some vulnerabilities in the Real Madrid side, while Mbappe's individual brilliance, coupled with some questionable refereeing decisions, ultimately tipped the scales in Real Madrid's favor.
What I find really fascinating is how these different sources each bring their own unique perspective to the same event. You got the instant reactions from the commentators, the more analytical post-match discussions, and then the broader context from the written articles. The takeaway for me is that a single football match can be interpreted in so many different ways, depending on where you're looking from, whether it's the tactical side, the refereeing controversies, or the overall impact on the title race.
It makes you think, doesn't it? In a sport as tight and unpredictable as football, those individual moments of brilliance, like we saw from Mbappe, and those split-second decisions made by the referee, They can have such a huge impact on how we view a team's performance and their chances of success. It's something to ponder as we watch the rest of the season unfold.
Absolutely. Every goal, every call, every twist and turn adds another layer to the narrative and ultimately shapes how this whole season will be remembered.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. I'm already looking forward to unpacking the next one.
Always a pleasure. Until next time.
All right, so long, everyone.
See you later.